My own daughter banned me from their Christmas party after I sold my home, for they could be rich. The boxes were neatly stacked along the living room wall, each one labeled in my careful cursive, "Kitchen linens, books keep." Sunlight poured through the windows of the house I had lived in for 34 years, warming the hardwood floors that still creaked in all the familiar places. It should have been a bittersweet day. Instead, it felt like an ending I didn't ask for. My name is Marlene. I'm 68 years old and lived in a quiet town outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Widowed. For over a decade, I raised my daughter Angela in this very home, the one with the lemon tree in the back in the chipped blue porch swing that rocked her to sleep when she was colicky. Angela asked me 6 months ago if I'd consider selling it. "It would change our lives, Mom," she said. "You'd be helping us get out of this financial rut for good. We could finally give the kids the life they deserve." I didn't hesitate. I said yes before she even finished her sentence. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the way she still called me Mommy when she wanted something the way she used to as a little girl, clutching my skirt. Maybe I was just tired of being alone and thought foolishly that giving her the money would pull me closer to the family again. Like love, if given generously enough, would circle back. I sold the house for $485,000. She and her husband promised they would help me find something smaller, something cozy but nice. We went apartment hunting together, and though she seemed impatient most days, she eventually settled me into a second-floor, one-bedroom, overlooking a parking lot. I told myself it was fine. I didn't need much. The check I gave them, $450,000, after I paid off my own little debts, was met with tears and hugs and thank yous. Angela kept saying, "You don't know what this means to us," and I believed her. The first few weeks after the move were filled with calls and updates from her about their new place. We found a 6-bedroom just outside of town. "Mom, it's stunning," she gushed. "There's even a media room, and I'm getting one of those walk-in pantries you always dreamed of." She invited me over to see the house once before the renovations began. I stood in the foyer with my hands folded, nodding politely, while her husband walked me through their vision. I admired the granite countertops I helped pay for, the new appliances, the custom cabinetry. It was beautiful. It really was, but I couldn't shake a quiet ache in my chest. The way she introduced me to the contractor as just my mom, not the reason we can even afford this. No mention, no acknowledgement. Still, I smiled. I told myself maybe she just forgot. Maybe gratitude comes quietly these days. I returned to my apartment, which smelled of new paint and loneliness. The lease was in her name, and I paid her monthly rent so she could keep the utilities bundled. She said it was easier that way. I agreed, because once again, I wanted to keep the peace. I filled my days with little things, crosswords, library visits, grocery shopping on Tuesdays. I waited for the weekends, hoping for calls that rarely came. And still, I didn't complain. I reminded myself that love is sacrifice that mothers give. That's what I'd always done. Until one evening, sitting on my couch with the TV murmuring in the background, I scrolled through my phone and saw a photo of Angela with her family at some high-end kitchen showroom, picking out quartz slabs. The caption read, "Making our dream a reality. Hard work pays off." Hard work. I sat in silence for a long while, the image burning into my chest like a cold brand. It wasn't even the lack of mention. It was the rewriting of the story, as though I never existed in this chapter of their success. No one needed to know, I told myself. Maybe that was her way of protecting my pride. But in that quiet apartment, with the hum of the heater kicking in and a single framed photo of her graduation day on my nightstand. I started to wonder, what was I protecting? My sacrifice was invisible, my presence temporary, my voice optional. I'd given her everything. Not just the house, not just the money, but every ounce of my trust, every stitch of belief that in the end, love wins. That blood matters. That being her mother meant something sacred. But I was beginning to learn something painful, something most mothers learn far too late. Sometimes the people you give everything to are the ones who make you feel like nothing. And if you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? The sound of footsteps echoed from the ceiling above my little apartment, followed by the sharp clatter of something heavy hitting the floor. Probably someone dragging furniture, or maybe a child leaping off the couch. Either way, the noise reminded me again that this place wasn't mine. It wasn't home. The second-floor apartment Angela found for me was in a newer complex, not far from where they were building their forever house. It had beige walls, standard carpets, and a tiny balcony that overlooked the parking lot dumpster. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself this was temporary. Angela had said they'd only need a few years to get back on track, a few years of financial breathing room, and then we could talk about a better plan for me. Maybe even having me live in the guest suite they were building with me in mind. That was back in April. By October, I was still here, still waiting. I unpacked my boxes slowly over the months, not because there was so much to do, but because I couldn't bring myself to finish. There's something final about lining your spice rack in a place you don't belong. Something quietly tragic about folding photo albums into closet shelves and hanging a calendar for a future that no longer includes birthdays with family penciled in. Angela had invited me over once or twice during the summer. The kids were always busy, her husband always on a call. I helped clean after barbecues, brought my potato salad, the one everyone used to request. She'd smile, but never quite meet my eyes when I asked when the house would be finished. Soon, she'd say. We're just so slammed right now. It was always we, and I was never part of it. Once I mentioned a leaky faucet in the apartment. She brushed it off. That's what maintenance is for Mom. Just put in a ticket. I missed the days when she would come over on Saturday mornings with donuts and sit cross-legged on my kitchen floor while I baked. Back when her face would light up when I surprised her with something small, her favorite tea, a scarf I knitted. Now, she barely had the patience for a 5-minute phone call. Her voice was clipped. She always had something else to do. And when she did call, it was often about something she needed. Could I pick up the kids from dance practice? Could I wait at her house for the landscaper? Could I sew the hem on a costume last minute? I always said, yes, of course I did, because I thought that was how I'd stay close. But closeness, it turns out, doesn't come from convenience. It comes from care, from presence, from being seen. The day I realized just how invisible I'd become, I was walking back from the mailbox. A couple of my neighbors, women closer to my age, were decorating the common area for fall. They offered me a cup of cider, and I sat on the edge of a folding chair in that crisp October air, trying not to cry as I laughed along with their stories. They didn't know me well, but they listened when I spoke. They asked about my day. They noticed when I smiled and when I didn't. And somehow, that 10 minutes of lighthearted chatter felt warmer than any of my daughter's recent interactions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the house I gave up, about the magnolia tree in the backyard that would be losing its last leaves. Now the creak of the second stair that warned you someone was coming. The smell of cinnamon I used to bake into the curtains every fall. I missed my bathtub. I missed my front porch. I missed the feeling of ownership, of identity. Here, I felt like a tenant in every sense, and not just in the apartment, in their lives too. The next morning, I went to visit the neighborhood where my old house used to stand. I parked across the street and watched the new owners unload groceries. A young couple. They seemed happy. I'm glad someone is making memories there now, but I couldn't help but wonder, was it foolish to think mine still mattered? I thought about knocking on the door, just to see it again, but I didn't. I drove away, back to the apartment, back to the parking lot and the quiet hallways, and the sound of footsteps that weren't hers. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come with loud words or broken plates. It creeps in gently, like silence that grows deeper every day. And when it settles, you begin to question everything. Not just them, but yourself. Did I expect too much? Was I too sentimental? Should I have asked for more? Written a contract? Held something back? Or is this what being a mother means? Giving, always giving, until you disappear. If you were me, would you have moved out so easily? I used to count the days between her visits. Now I count the weeks between her texts. It's a quiet erosion, how love disappears. Not all at once, but grain by grain, until the hands that once reached for yours now only text when it's convenient, if they text at all. Angela had promised that we'd still do family dinners. She said we'd be closer than ever. You'll see the kids more, not less. She swore when I sold the house, Mom, this is going to be so good for us. But that was then. That was when she needed something. Now most weeks I felt more like a chore than a choice. The last time she came by, it was to drop off a box of hand-me-down clothes I never asked for. These might fit you, she said, almost absently, as she handed me a box filled with stretched-out cardigans and scarves I wouldn't wear. I thanked her anyway, because I always do. It was the way she looked past me, scanning the apartment like it was a waiting room. She didn't sit, didn't ask if I needed anything, just stood by the door, as if to make it clear she wasn't staying. I tried to fill the silence. I told her about the book club I joined at the local library, about the little girl who always smiled at me in the elevator, about the elderly man on my floor who played violin in the evenings, soft music that curled through the vents. She nodded, barely listening. "That's nice, Mom," she said, looking at her watch. "I've got to run. We're going to look at light fixtures for the master bath." The master bath, the one I helped pay for. She hugged me quickly, like a stranger, and was gone. The clock on the wall ticked louder after she left. Every sound felt sharper, more hollow. I stood there for a long time, her perfume still hanging in the air, wondering what I'd done to become so forgettable. I used to be everything to her. She was my world. I worked 3 jobs to put her through school. I skipped meals to make sure she could have what her classmates had: new shoes, lunch money, birthday parties with balloons, and rented bouncy castles. I never once asked her to pay me back, but I never imagined that this was what repayment would look like. I scrolled through my phone that night, reading old texts from her, back when she used to call me Mommy, when she used to say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Now her messages were curt, transactional, sometimes a thumbs-up emoji, sometimes just silence. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, so I tried again. I made a big pot of chili, her favorite, with cornbread and honey butter. I texted her, told her I'd love to have the family over for dinner. Just something cozy. I waited. 2 days passed. No response. On the 3rd day, she replied, "This week is packed. Maybe some other time." Some other time. Those 3 words clanged through my head all night. I sat alone at the small round table in my kitchen. The chili cooled in its pot. The cornbread sat untouched. I stared at the empty place settings like a fool. I didn't throw the food away. I packed it into containers and labeled them with dates. I stacked them in my fridge like they were memories I could preserve, waiting for someone to claim them. The next week, I passed by her house while riding the community shuttle. I caught a glimpse of twinkling string lights in the yard, a dozen cars parked along the curb. Later, I saw the photos on Facebook. Family Taco Night, the caption read. Everyone's smiling kids running around with sparklers. Even her in-laws were there. But I wasn't. I wasn't even asked. That night, I couldn't help but wonder what family really meant to her anymore, and where exactly I had gone wrong. I had given her freedom, stability, luxury. I thought that would bring us closer. But the more I gave, the more she drifted. They say some people only love you for what you give them, not who you are. And when the giving stops or slows, they vanish. Maybe she didn't even realize what she was doing. Maybe in her mind, she loved me the same. But love, if it doesn't show up, begins to rot. It's like leaving fruit on the counter too long. It looks okay for a while, until one day it collapses under its own skin. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and asked myself something that I had never dared before. Would she still love me if I had nothing left to give? If you were me, would you still keep trying? The leaves had all fallen by mid-November, and the sky over Asheville took on that pale, sunless hue that always made me think of old linens, washed too many times, no color left to hold. The stores had started their Christmas displays already. Red and gold ribbons curled in storefront windows. Joy signs blinked in battery-powered neon, and carols hummed softly from every corner. Usually the start of the holiday season would fill me with warmth. This year, all I felt was hesitation. I began gathering small gifts for the grandchildren weeks ahead of time. A puzzle book for Ella, who'd recently taken to crosswords like her father. A glittery unicorn journal for little Madison. A Lego firefighter truck for James. I even bought matching slippers for Angela and her husband Gray, for him blush pink, for her soft as clouds. I wrapped them carefully, tied them with silver ribbon, and tucked handwritten tags on each. I even wrote "Love Grandma" in my neatest script. My hands trembled a bit, now more than they used to. But the tags mattered. This year, I wanted to feel needed. I wanted to belong again. In early December, I called Angela. I stood in my tiny kitchen, with the phone against my ear heart, ticking like a clock in my throat. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Hey, Mom," she said, distracted. I could hear the baby crying in the background, the echo of a TV in another room. "Can I call you back? It's chaos here." "Oh," I said, smiling into the empty room. "Just wanted to ask, do you need help with anything for Christmas this year? You know I'm happy to cook or babysit while you shop, whatever you need." There was a long pause. "We're still figuring out the plans," she said vaguely. "I'll let you know." "Okay." I said sure. Of course. No pressure. I hung up and stared at the snow globe on my windowsill. It was one of the few things I brought from the old house, a glass dome with a tiny cabin and swirling flakes. When I shook it, the scene inside came to life. It made me feel just for a second like anything could still be magical. Days passed. Then a week. Then another. No update. I saw her post online about the holiday pre-planning brunch she hosted for a dozen friends. The house looked stunning. The table was set with gold-rimmed china, matching napkins, champagne flutes. There was no mention of me. I called her again. This time, it went to voicemail. So I sent a text. "Hi, sweetheart. Just wondering if you have any Christmas plans yet. Would love to see everyone if possible." She didn't reply until the next morning. And when she did, it was one sentence that knocked the breath clean out of me. "We're keeping it very small this year. Just immediate family. Immediate family. I stared at those two words until the letters blurred. I read them again and again, as if repetition would make them mean something different. I was her mother. I gave birth to her. How could I not be immediate family? I didn't respond. I couldn't. I walked to the closet and looked at the wrapped gifts stacked neatly on the shelf. They looked out of place now, like relics from a world that no longer existed. I traced the edge of a silver ribbon and sat down hard on the bed. I stayed there for hours, just sitting, just breathing, just letting the grief settle in my bones like winter air. Later that night, I tried to find a reason, any reason, why I would be excluded. Had I said something wrong? Was I too needy? Had I called too often? Not enough. I considered calling her to ask. But what was there to say? How do you explain to someone that their silence has started to sound like a door slamming shut? A few days later, I saw a post from her neighbor photos of the kids building gingerbread houses in the dining room, laughter frozen in time. Angela was in the background, smiling, wide her hand, resting on the back of her husband's chair. There were cookies on platters, string lights glowing, and a banner that read, "Merry and Bright." It was everything I had imagined when I sold the house, everything I thought we would share. But I wasn't even in the room. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and held it close for warmth. Outside, the lights on the apartment building flickered a half-hearted attempt at holiday cheer. Inside, I unwrapped the slippers I had bought for Angela. I tried them on. They fit me just fine. If you were me, would you still keep hoping to be invited? It came on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of dull, overcast December day where the sky hangs low and heavy, like it wants to press you into the ground. I was folding laundry, slowly, methodically, just to give myself something to do. The scent of lavender from the dryer sheets still clung faintly to the towels. My phone buzzed from the counter. I wiped my hands and walked over, half expecting a promotional alert from the pharmacy, or maybe a message from my book club. It was Angela. The message was short, blunt, almost clinical. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to let you know we've decided to keep Christmas immediate family only this year. Things have been a lot, and we're just keeping it low-key. Hope you understand." I stood there with the phone in my hand, staring at the message as if it might grow another sentence. Something softer, something warmer, something that sounded like her. But that was it. No "we'll miss you." No "let's do something after." No "love you." Just a wall. A decision delivered like a weather report. Matter of fact, unchangeable, barely personal. I sat down slowly at the table, the folded towels still warm under my arms. I read the message again. This time, the words seemed colder, sharper. Immediate family only. And what was I? I had sold my house for her, handed her nearly $500,000 without hesitation. I lived in this apartment, this holding cell, of beige and echoes, so she could thrive. And now I wasn't even family enough for a Christmas plate at her table. I didn't cry right away. There's a strange numbness that comes before the heartbreak, a kind of mental fog that shields you from the impact, at least for a few moments. I sat in that fog heart, slowly catching up to what my eyes had read. It wasn't about the party. It wasn't even about the food or the decorations or the children's laughter. It was about the door and how she had chosen to close it. I opened the cupboard and took out the tin of shortbread cookies I had bought weeks earlier, Angela's favorite. I had planned to bring them over warm in a basket lined with a red gingham napkin. Now they sat unopened. I placed them on the counter. I didn't have the strength to put them away. Later that evening, I went to the small storage box in my closet and pulled out the decorations I had brought from the old house. A ceramic angel with a chipped wing, a strand of golden lights, a needlepoint stocking with Mom stitched across the top. I hung it, even though I knew no one would fill it. That night I didn't sleep. I turned off all the lights and sat by the window, watching the glow from other apartments. Windows flickered with Christmas trees, and silhouettes of people laughing, toasting clinking glasses, families. Across the parking lot, someone's little girl danced in a tutu in front of her living room TV. She wore a Santa hat and spun until she collapsed in giggles. It felt like I was watching the world from behind a pane of glass. Present, but untouchable. The next morning, I thought about responding to Angela's message. Just something small. Okay, thanks for letting me know. Merry Christmas. But I couldn't type it. My fingers hovered over the screen, my heart caving in. What would be the point of saying, Merry Christmas, to someone who had just erased me from it? So I didn't reply at all. I went through the motions in the days that followed, walking, eating, pretending. I smiled at the woman across the hall when she complimented my holiday door wreath. I thanked the postman when he dropped off a parcel. I even hummed along to Bing Crosby at the grocery store. But everything felt thin, paper thin. On Christmas Eve, I placed the wrapped gifts back into a storage bag and slid them under the bed. I didn't have the heart to open them, but I couldn't bear to throw them out either. There's something unspeakably painful about preparing for a moment you'll never be allowed to have. I boiled water for tea and sat on the couch as the night folded in around me. The television played one of those holiday specials, all glitter and music, and scripted miracles. A child reunited with a grandparent. A family snowed in together. Laughter, forgiveness, joy. I watched with a detached sort of awe, as though such closeness belonged to a different species. I wasn't invited. I wasn't needed. I wasn't even missed. I sipped my tea slowly and whispered to myself, this is just 1 year, just one. But my heart knew better, because it wasn't just 1 year. It was the unveiling of a truth I had tried so hard not to see. She didn't want me there, and that truth settled like frost across my chest, cold still and heartbreakingly clear. If you were me, would you have answered that message? The morning of Christmas Eve came quiet and gray, with the kind of cold that presses through your sleeves, no matter how thick your sweater is. I opened the blinds to see frost on the railings outside and little puffs of white breath from the early joggers below. The world moved on, as it always does. Inside it was still, too still. No tree, no garland, no string of twinkling lights. Just the wreath I'd placed on the apartment door weeks ago, a little green ring with a red bow that now looked tired and misplaced. I had tried to create some kind of warmth in this place, but warmth doesn't live in decorations. It lives in people. And I was alone. The kettle whistled. I made my tea slowly. The cup felt heavy in my hand, the ceramic too smooth, too quiet. I sat at the table and looked around. 1 chair, 1 mug, 1 person. No noise except the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car starting in the lot below. It was Christmas Eve. I had never spent one alone, not once. Even during the hard years, when my late husband worked nights and Angela was still little, we always had something, a small tree, a candle, a single present wrapped in old newspaper and tied with yarn. We made do. We made joy, even out of scraps. But this was something else. I set a place at the table anyway, out of habit more than hope. 1 plate, 1 napkin, 1 fork. I ladled some soup from the slow cooker into a bowl and laid a paper cracker beside it. A joke gift I'd found at the dollar store, a red plastic snowflake with a tiny peppermint inside. I pulled it by myself. The snap barely echoed in the room. There was no laughter to follow, I ate slowly, not because I was hungry, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Each spoonful echoed in my ears. Each bite tasted like silence. I thought about turning on the TV, maybe a Hallmark movie, something with fake snow and impossibly beautiful endings. But I couldn't stomach the pretense. Not tonight. Instead, I pulled the photo album from the shelf. The one I'd put together years ago, pages full of Angela's first Christmas, her sticky fingers, in the frosting bowl the year she got her first bike. I ran my hand over the plastic cover, opened it. There she was, 3 years old, sitting on my lap, her smile as wide as the ribbon in her hair. I looked tired in the photo, but happy, fulfilled. My hand was wrapped around her belly, keeping her from tipping off the armrest. She had no idea how hard things were back then. No idea that I skipped dinner that year so she could have a stocking full of oranges and candy canes. No idea how I sat up at night, hand-sewing little doll clothes from old fabric scraps just to see her eyes light up in the morning. But that's what being a mother is. You give without being asked. You sacrifice without a parade. You love quietly, endlessly, hoping it's enough. I flipped the page. Another year. Another smile. And then I remembered last Christmas. She had invited me then. Begrudgingly, perhaps. But still, it happened. I brought a casserole. Wore the green sweater she once said brought out my eyes. Watched the kids open their presents while I sipped coffee in the corner unnoticed for most of the morning. I remember offering to help clean up. "Oh, we've got it, Mom," she said, waving me away like a shadow. Still, I stayed until the lights dimmed and the guests filtered out. She hugged me on the way out, but it was the kind of hug that ends before it begins. Polite, distant. It hadn't felt right then. It felt worse now. I turned another page in the album. The doorbell didn't ring. The phone didn't buzz. No one knocked. No one texted. No one called. The entire day passed like a forgotten song, familiar, but without sound. I sat in the same spot until the sky outside turned navy blue and the porch lights below flickered on. Somewhere, children were laughing. Fireworks popped faintly in the distance. In another life, that would have been me wrapping gifts with Angela. That would have been me tucking my grandkids into bed, whispering stories of Santa and sleigh bells and cookies left out by the fireplace. But not this year. This year I was invisible. And the loudest thing in that apartment wasn't the TV or the kettle or the creak of the floorboards. It was my heart. It beat with questions I had no answers for. How did I get here? How did loving someone so much lead to this? And most painful of all, would she even notice I was missing? I rose from the chair just before midnight, turned off the lights, crawled into bed, still dressed. I pulled the covers up high and whispered into the pillow, "Merry Christmas, Marlene," because no one else would. If you were me, would you have gone to bed with your shoes still on? The day after Christmas, the world was already moving on. Decorations drooped. Wrapping paper littered the sidewalks like wilted leaves. Storefronts had shifted into their next goal, New Year's sales resolutions, fresh starts. But for me, there was no reset button, just the echo of everything that hadn't happened. I spent the morning quietly, trying to shake the weight of the night before. I opened a new box of cereal, watered my plants, sat in the armchair by the window with a book I couldn't focus on. My fingers kept turning pages my mind didn't read. Then around noon, I did something I hadn't dared to do before. I opened Facebook. I told myself I just wanted to see if Angela had posted any photos of the kids, just something to feel connected. Maybe she'd written something sweet about the holiday. Maybe in some corner of her celebration, I'd find evidence that she had missed me, that I still existed in her joy. I shouldn't have looked. Her page was full. full of smiling faces, twinkling lights, the glossy sheen of a magazine-perfect Christmas. There was a long dining table, covered in gold chargers and crystal glassware, centerpieces bursting with red roses and eucalyptus. Everyone dressed in coordinated tones, her husband in a navy suit, Angela in a velvet green dress that shimmered like a ribbon. The kids in matching plaid pajamas and grins so wide they hurt to look at. And there in the center of it all was Angela holding up a wine glass in a toast. The caption read, "A Christmas to remember in our dream home." Feeling so blessed. I scrolled through the comments. Friends gushed. Acquaintances admired the decor. Her mother-in-law left a heart emoji and wrote, "What a beautiful family you've built, darling." Built. I looked around my apartment. The single strand of golden lights now unlit the paper snowflake. I taped to the fridge, peeling at the corners, the unopened box of shortbread still sitting on the counter. I looked at my slippers, the ones I had meant to give to her, now warming my own tired feet. And I looked at myself wrapped in a cardigan that had seen better decades, holding a phone that felt heavier than grief should be allowed to. She had everything now. The house, the party, the adoration, the comfort, and not just comfort luxury. The kitchen in the photo was dazzling marble countertops, pendant lights, a double oven. She stood in front of it like a queen in her castle. And I was the one who handed her the crown. When I sold the house, I thought I was helping her build a life. I thought I was investing in her happiness, in our future. But she didn't build something for both of us. She built something for herself and made sure there wasn't room for me. There were more photos of the kids opening presents beside a 12-foot tree, of her husband lighting the fireplace with one hand, while holding a mug of cocoa in the other, of guests mingling in that vast living room I helped pay for. Laughter frozen mid-frame wine glasses raised joy unbothered. I wasn't in a single picture. I wasn't even tagged. It felt like watching a movie you once starred in, now recast, without you, and no one even noticed you were gone. I closed the app. My hands were trembling again. I walked to the mirror and looked at my face. The lines around my eyes had deepened my hair, thinner at the part. I barely recognized myself, not because of age, but because I looked like a stranger in my own story. I sank back into the chair, heart thudding. It wasn't the exclusion that hurt the most. It was the rewriting. I had been erased, rewritten out of the origin story of their success, their joy, their celebration. No one saw the woman who packed her life into cardboard so her daughter could live like a queen. No one saw the Christmas lights I had once strung up with frozen fingers in a stepladder. No one saw the years of sacrifice, the decades of quiet, unconditional love. All they saw now was the glittering surface. I thought about calling her, not to fight, not to accuse, just to hear her voice, just to ask in a whisper, "Did you even think of me?" But I didn't, because if I had to ask, then I already knew the answer. Instead, I pulled the curtains closed and stood in the dark, breathing through the ache. She had made her life beautiful, and I had helped her do it, but the cost was mine alone to pay. If you were me, would you have looked? I didn't sleep that night. I lay still, under the weight of memory, staring at the ceiling, counting the slow, steady breaths that reminded me I was still here, even if I wasn't seen. Around 3 a.m., I got up, made tea, and sat in my robe by the kitchen table, watching the steam curl like ghosted ribbons above the mug. The building was silent. No footsteps, no pipes knocking. Just me and the hum of an old refrigerator. My photo album lay open beside the kettle. I hadn't closed it since Christmas Eve. My fingers hovered above one of the older pictures, Angela, no more than 5, grinning with frosting on her nose hands buried in cookie dough. Her eyes sparkled like mischief and sugar and trust. It's a strange thing to mourn someone who's still alive. But I did. I missed that version of her so deeply, it made my ribs ache. She had always been a bright child. Sensitive. Strong-willed, yes, but thoughtful. When her father passed, she was only 16. And yet, she rose with a kind of quiet grace. She helped me sort papers, cooked her first spaghetti, without being asked, stood beside me at the funeral, like a steady branch. I thought losing him had brought us closer. Maybe it had. Back then, she would curl up on the couch beside me with her homework and ask me to braid her hair while she read. She'd hum softly under her breath, a nervous habit. I loved that sound. I used to hum too when I was anxious. I never told her she got it from me. She cried the night she got accepted into college, happy tears mixed with fear. "What if I can't do it?" she asked. "You can," I said, "because you always have." I worked 2 shifts for 3 months just to buy her a used car before she left. I remember the look on her face, disbelief, then joy, then guilt. She hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. She promised she'd pay me back. I told her I didn't want money. I just wanted to be part of her life. She used to call every Sunday when she moved away. Then it became once a month. Then it only came when she needed something. And yet even then, I kept loving her with the same open palms. Even when she forgot my birthday one year. Even when she brushed me off at Thanksgiving. Even when she said I was too much in front of her friends because I brought a photo of her father to dinner. Even when she turned down the corners of her mouth when I asked for help with my phone, like I was an inconvenience. I let so much slide because she was my daughter, and daughters, we're taught, are allowed to grow, to change, to stumble. But mothers, we're expected to remain unshakable until we're not even visible anymore. I looked at another photo, Angela in her graduation gown. Her lipstick, too red, her hair curled just right. I remember sitting on the bleachers, crying as she crossed the stage. A stranger took that photo for me. And then one from her wedding. Her hand wrapped around her new husband's arm, her face turned toward the future. I was standing at the edge of the frame, cropped nearly out of sight. Even back then, I had started to fade. What happened to that girl, the one who used to draw me birthday cards with shaky crayons and stick figure hearts, the one who told her second-grade teacher I was the best cook in the world, the one who once sat on my bed at 2 a.m. and asked me if broken hearts ever really heal? I answered her that night with a lie. Yes, sweetie, they always do. But now I wasn't so sure. I held the photo close and let the tears fall this time. Not because I was angry, not even because I was hurt, but because I loved her so deeply, so fully, so endlessly. And she didn't even seem to remember who I was anymore. She called me when she needed me, but she never called just to say she missed me. That distinction dug deeper than any words she'd ever spoken. And still part of me longed for her to walk through that door, to bring her daughters and her apologies, to say, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I forgot who you are to me. Let's fix this." But she wouldn't, and I couldn't beg for what should have been freely given. I kissed the corner of the photo, like I used to kiss her forehead after tucking her in. "Good night," I whispered. "If you were me, would you still keep the photos?" It was a Tuesday morning when the phone finally rang. The sound startled me. It had been so long since I'd heard it. I thought for a moment it was the fire alarm. I was folding laundry again, hands knee-deep in towels, when I saw her name light up the screen. Angela. My heart kicked. I froze, holding the towel like it might break if I let go. For a moment, I didn't move, just stared at her name, glowing blue in the quiet, like it had been waiting for me. Was she calling to apologize? Had she seen the photos and realized what she had done? Was this the moment I had imagined 1,000 times, her voice breaking, saying, "I'm sorry, Mom. I miss you. I want to make it right." I picked up. "Hello. Hey, Mom," she said, cheerful, but rushed her voice almost a performance. "So glad you answered. I wasn't sure you'd be up." I glanced at the clock. 9:42 a.m. I was always up by 7. She didn't wait for me to respond. "Listen, Brandon and I are heading to Snowshoe for a ski trip this weekend. His company got us this really nice cabin and lift passes. Super last minute, like totally unexpected." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. My knees felt uncertain. "That sounds lovely," I said, cautious. "Yeah, it'll be great. Just us adults. We need the break. You know. Anyway, would you mind watching the kids while we're gone?" I blinked. "What?" "The girls," she said. "Just Friday through Sunday. You don't have to worry about food. We'll meal prep everything. They can just sleep over at your place. We'll drop them off Friday afternoon and pick them up Sunday night." I swallowed hard. My chest felt heavy, not because she asked, but because of how she asked. No mention of Christmas. No explanation. No apology. Just a request. As if we were right where we left off. As if nothing had happened. I forced myself to breathe. "Angela," I said quietly, "I wasn't invited to Christmas." There was a pause. One of those silences that stretches longer than it should. And then she let out a small, almost dismissive laugh. "Oh, Mom, don't start that again. It wasn't a big deal. We just wanted to keep it simple this year." "Simple," I said, voice trembling now. "You posted pictures of 20 people in your house." Another pause. "Well, that was just... It wasn't planned. People dropped by. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, because I hadn't been there. And I knew that if I hadn't seen those photos, I would have believed her, just like always. I felt the towel still damp in my lap. "I sat alone, Angela," I said. "I made dinner for one. I hung up a stocking no one filled. I waited for a message, a call, anything." Her tone shifted. "Oh, come on, Mom. You're acting like we did something horrible. We just wanted a little space. You're making this a thing when it doesn't have to be." A thing. My heartbreak was now a thing. "And now you want me to take the girls for a weekend so you can go skiing," I said, voice calm but cracking. After everything, there was another silence. This one colder. "I thought you liked spending time with them," she said, now defensive. "But if you're going to be passive-aggressive about it, then maybe it's not a good idea." That was it. The knife. She had flipped it. Again. I wasn't the mother who was hurt. I was now the one making her uncomfortable. I felt something break inside me. A seam that had held for too long. And from that fracture, truth poured out. "Angela," I said slowly, "I gave you my home, my future. I gave you everything I had left in this world. And you gave me a message, a sentence, a holiday, alone." She said nothing. I kept going. "And now you want to hand me your children, like I'm a piece of furniture you store when it's convenient. Like I'm a backup plan." She scoffed, but it was brittle. "I'm their grandmother," I said. "Not your housekeeper, not your doormat. And for the first time, I'm going to say no." It hung in the air like frost. "No," she repeated, stunned, as if she couldn't process the word. "No." Silence. And then, "Fine," she snapped. "Wow, this is unbelievable." And the line went dead. I sat there long after the phone went dark. My hands trembled. My breath came shallow. Not from regret, but from release. Because I had said it. I had finally said no. And in that small, painful, powerful word, I began to find something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Myself. If you were me, would you have answered differently? After I hung up the phone, I just sat there, utterly still. The silence in the room was thick and humming, like the moment after thunder, when the sky is deciding whether to cry or hold its breath. I stared at the phone. I half expected it to ring again, for her to call back, apologize, to realize what she'd done, to come to her senses and say, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." But it didn't ring. And she didn't. I had always said yes. Always. Even when it hurt. Even when it cost me time, money, energy, dignity. I had been her yes woman since she could walk, picking her up after midnight in college, when her ride bailed, watching the kids for weeks after her surgery, paying off her debt when she didn't want her husband to know. I had said yes when she asked me to sell the house. Yes, when she wanted to use my name on the lease. Yes, when she slowly began phasing me out of her life like I was a guest overstaying my welcome. But now I had said no, not to punish her, not out of spite, but because I couldn't keep abandoning myself. For the first time, I didn't just speak, I was heard. And even if she didn't understand it, I did. I had drawn a line in the sand. The next morning, I made myself breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee strong and hot. I turned on the radio, not the news, but music. Old jazz, the kind I used to play when she was a baby. And I danced around the kitchen with her cradled in one arm. I looked at my phone. Still no call, no message. But I didn't crumble. I folded laundry. I went for a walk. I went to the library and checked out a mystery novel I'd been meaning to read. And still no call. By late afternoon, I started to think maybe she really wasn't going to come back from this. It wasn't the absence that stung. It was the certainty behind it. The knowledge that she truly believed she could treat me this way, and that I'd still come running the way I always had. But I didn't. That night, as I sat by the window and watched the lights flicker across the neighboring buildings, I started to feel something I hadn't in months, my own life returning to me. It was quiet, gentle, like the first snow, soft, unexpected, quietly covering everything you thought was too bare to bloom again. I had been so wrapped up in trying to stay close to her, I hadn't noticed how far from myself I had drifted. And that realization, however painful, felt like truth. The next day, I received a message. Just one line. "Well, I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. Not because it surprised me, but because it proved she hadn't heard a word I'd said. It wasn't about happiness. It was about dignity. I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the message, then turned off my phone for the rest of the evening. That night, I pulled out a notebook. I hadn't written anything in a while, too busy surviving to reflect. But I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "I said no. I chose myself. And even if I lose her completely, I know now I was never lost to begin with. I was just buried. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe more silence, maybe more anger, maybe worse. But I also knew that for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of her disappointment, because I had finally stopped disappointing myself. Being a mother had been my whole world, but I was more than just her mother. I was a woman, a human being, one who deserved to be treated with care, with respect, with love that didn't come with strings. And if she couldn't give that, then maybe I needed to learn how to give it to myself. If you were me, would you have held your ground? It started with silence, as so many rifts do. Days passed, then a week. No phone call, no apology, not even a lazy excuse or guilt-laced just checking in. Nothing. I didn't reach out either. And then came the message. It landed in my inbox one Thursday evening like a stone through a glass window. The words were sharp-polished and dressed up to sound reasonable, like anger wearing a nice coat. "I just don't understand why you're acting like this. We didn't exclude you to hurt you. You're making everything about yourself. This is exactly why we needed space. I stared at it for a long while. My first reaction wasn't rage. It wasn't even pain. It was exhaustion. How many times had I heard that before? You're being too emotional. You're always overreacting. We didn't mean it like that. You're making things difficult. Translation: you're inconvenient when you have needs. It was always easier for her to blame me than to look at her own actions. She'd learned it young. I let her. I responded carefully, not with fire, not with tears, just clarity. Angela, this isn't about making things about me. This is about being treated like a person who matters. Being part of a family means showing up. It means not leaving your mother alone on Christmas without even a call. You hurt me, and instead of acknowledging that you're accusing me of making it worse, I won't play that game anymore. She didn't reply. Instead, 2 days later, she posted on social media another perfectly polished photo of her and her family having brunch at a trendy cafe. The caption, "Surround yourself with people who lift you up." A dig probably, but I didn't let it touch me the way it once would have, because I'd started to see it for what it was. Angela didn't want a mother anymore. She wanted a mirror, something that reflected only her best angles, that supported and clapped and nodded and never ever challenged her. I used to be that mirror, smiling even when it hurt, holding back even when my heart broke. But now I had stepped out of the frame, and she didn't like it. That weekend she called my sister. I know, because Carol rang me afterward, unsure what to believe. "Angela says you yelled at her," she said gently, "that you refused to see the kids out of spite." I closed my eyes, the pain behind them, pulsing slow and steady. "I didn't yell," I said. "I said no. There's a difference." Carol sighed. "She's just upset. She says she feels judged." "I've never judged her," I said. "I've given her everything." I know Carol said quieter now. "I know you have." The conversation ended there, but the ache lingered. Angela wasn't just angry. She was reconstructing the story, making herself the victim, making me the villain. She needed that version of the truth. It was easier than confronting the real one. And maybe deep down, she felt guilty. But guilt often wears the mask of resentment. She resented me for holding up a mirror now, for naming the things she'd rather leave buried. But I wouldn't cover them anymore. I went back through my photo album that night. But I wasn't looking for her. I was looking for me. Me in the garden, dirt under my nails. Me sewing costumes late at night, exhausted, but smiling. Me dancing with her in the kitchen. Me in my old blue coat arms, full of groceries and love. I'd been more than just her mother. I'd been a woman who built a life, and I was still here. Let her blame me. Let her twist it. I knew the truth now, and it didn't live in her words anymore. It lived in my boundaries, in my peace, in my reflection. If you were me, would you still defend yourself? New Year's Eve came with rain. Soft at first, just a whispering drizzle against the windows. Then, harder, louder, insistent, as though the sky itself was grieving. I was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket I'd knitted the winter after Angela was born. I'd meant it for her someday, a gift to pass on. I never gave it to her. I kept it folded in the closet all these years, untouched. That night, I pulled it out for myself. The TV flickered in the background with coverage of the ball drop. Glitter champagne, horns, countdowns. 1,000 voices ready to forget the past year, to run towards something better. But I wasn't ready to forget. I was still standing in the ashes of what had burned down. I hadn't heard from Angela since the message. No calls, no cards, no softening. Just a cold, deliberate distance that grew by the day. Then as the clock neared midnight, I made the mistake of checking social media again. I should have known better. There it was, a photo posted just 30 minutes before. Angela radiant, in a silver dress, her arm linked with her husband's, her smile wide and dazzling. They were surrounded by people, friends, neighbors, her in-laws, all wearing glitter hats and holding glasses of champagne. And the caption, ringing in the new year, with my chosen family, grateful for the love that lifts us every day. Chosen family, the phrase carved through me with a slow, ruthless precision. Not just a party, not just a photo, but a declaration, a rewriting of lineage, a public dismissal of everything I had ever been to her. I wasn't just forgotten, I was replaced. I stared at that photo. I stared for too long. I searched it for something, anything that said, maybe she missed me. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe in some quiet way, she wanted me back in the fold. But there was nothing. No mention, no message, no trace. Just her new family, her better one, the one without me. I felt something inside me fold in on itself. A part of my heart that had been fragile for months simply gave up. The tears didn't fall in a rush. They came slow, one at a time, down my cheeks, along the corners of my mouth, onto the blanket I once thought she would wrap around her own children. I sat like that for an hour. I didn't even notice when the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Outside, fireworks exploded. Cheers erupted. Bottles popped. Strangers kissed. The world celebrated a future I wasn't part of. And still I didn't move, because inside me, it wasn't midnight. Inside me, it was a funeral, a quiet, private goodbye to something sacred. My daughter hadn't just locked me out of her home. She had locked me out of her heart. I thought back to the first time she said mama. I could still hear her voice, tiny and unsure, full of wonder. I thought about her first steps, how she'd run straight into my arms. I thought about the way she used to cling to my hand, crossing parking lots, how she used to braid my hair and call it magic. And now somehow, I had become nothing to her. How do you grieve a child who's still alive? How do you let go when your soul is made of the very thread that once held her close? I didn't have those answers, but I knew this much. Something had broken, not just in her, but in me. Not the kind of break that screams or shatters, but the quiet kind. The kind that marks the end of a story you never wanted to stop telling. At 12:43 a.m., I turned off my phone. I poured the last of the tea. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words. I release her. And though my heart was still bleeding, some small part of me began to breathe. If you were me, would you have kept looking at that photo? The days that followed were quiet. Not empty, but different. Like walking into a room you once knew where everything had shifted just slightly, and you're no longer sure where to place your hands. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring, stopped hoping for a message, stopped refreshing her page. Instead, I turned inward toward the things I had neglected for far too long. Me. It started with the simplest thing, a walk. I laced up my old sneakers, worn from years of errands, and school drop-offs, and grocery runs, and stepped outside. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed it. It was real. It was honest. I walked past the mailboxes, through the hedges lining the apartment parking lot, and turned left at the corner where the small public library stood like a forgotten treasure chest. I hadn't been inside since the fall. I used to go all the time. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Joy, looked up and smiled when she saw me. "We haven't seen you in a while, Marlene." "I've been inside," I said, unsure how else to explain. She nodded, like she understood more than she let on. "We're starting a journaling group on Wednesdays," she offered. "Nothing big. Just a few women getting together to write and share." I hesitated, but something in me whispered, "Say yes this time." So I did. That Wednesday, I walked in with a notebook and trembling hands. I didn't say much at first. I listened to stories about husbands who had passed children, who had moved away, dreams deferred but not forgotten. And somewhere between the poems and the confessions and the quiet tears, I began to feel something crack open inside me. Connection. It didn't stop there. I signed up to volunteer at the senior center on Saturdays. Nothing complicated, just helping serve lunch and chatting with folks who had more stories than time to tell them. There was a man named Walter, who played harmonica by the window. A woman named Dee, who used to be a nurse and could fold napkins into roses. They didn't know about Angela. They didn't ask. They just looked me in the eye and smiled when I spoke. It felt like being seen again, not as a mother, not as someone's disappointment, just as a person. I started waking up earlier, cooking real meals for myself. I planted daffodil bulbs in the planters outside my apartment window, even though winter still held the ground hard and frozen. "They'll bloom when they're ready," I whispered, pressing them into the soil. "So will I." And slowly, ever so slowly, I began to believe that. There were still moments of grief, of course. The ache didn't vanish overnight, but it softened. It became something I could carry without it breaking me. I wrote letters I never sent, one to Angela, one to myself. In the one addressed to her, I wrote, "I will always love you. That will never change. But I am no longer willing to disappear to keep your comfort intact. I gave you my past. I will not give you my soul." In the one to myself, I wrote, "You are more than forgotten holidays. You are more than silent phones. You are more than what she failed to give you." The journaling group clapped when I read that last one out loud. It felt strange being applauded. Strange, but right. For so long, I had twisted myself into smaller and smaller shapes, just to fit into the corners of someone else's life. But now I was unfolding, stretching, planting, becoming. I was building a new kind of family. Not bound by blood, but by kindness. Not by obligation, but by truth. And it turned out there was room for me in this world, after all. If you were me, would you have started again? Spring arrived, not with a trumpet, but with a whisper, a breeze, a little warmer, a sky, a little bluer, a morning where the daffodils outside my window bloomed yellow and bright, like they'd always known the right time. I watched them sway one morning, sipping my tea, and realized I hadn't thought about Angela in days. Not with the sharp sting, not with the aching wish. I had been busy living, really living. It was then I knew my healing had quietly outrun my heartbreak. Still something inside me wasn't finished. Not bitter, not spiteful, but unfinished. There were things I needed to put in order, not out of vengeance, but clarity. Angela hadn't reached out in over 3 months. Not even on my birthday. Not to check on me. Not to ask how I was doing. Nothing. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. So I sat down with my lawyer. Not a dramatic meeting. No gavel, no gasps. Just a quiet office and a firm handshake. "I want to revise my will," I said simply. He nodded, professional but kind. Angela had once been set to inherit everything. What was left of my retirement, my insurance policy, a modest savings account, the few heirlooms I had held on to. But now those things would go elsewhere. To the women's shelter in town that helped older women starting over. To the community library, so they could build a better writing space for the journaling group. To the senior center, where Walter played his harmonica for anyone who'd listen. People who had seen me, sat beside me, reminded me I still mattered. I left a letter with the will. Not cruel, not scathing, just honest. "Angela, you were once my whole world. I gave you all I had, with love and without condition. But love is not a license to be discarded. My final gifts will go to those who honored me while I was still here. I hope one day you'll understand this choice, and that you'll forgive me the way I forgave you over and over again. Mom. I signed it, folded it, and placed it in the envelope with my name in full. And I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for her. I wasn't bending toward her moods. I wasn't holding my breath in hopes of being invited back in. I had stepped off the path I'd worn into the ground, chasing her shadow. And now I was walking a new one step at a time, with people who welcomed me, with air that didn't feel like glass, with a sense of self I had almost forgotten. Some would call it revenge, but it wasn't. It was simply balance. Angela had taken so much, but she didn't get to take the rest of me. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't demand anything in return. I simply let go with grace, with truth, and with the quiet power of a woman no longer waiting to be seen. If you were me, would you have rewritten the ending? It was Christmas again, 12 months to the day since I'd sat alone at a kitchen table, set for one clinging to hope, like it might call me back. But this time, there was no waiting. This time, the table was full, not of blood relatives, but of something stronger chosen family. Friends who had taken root in my life during the quietest, loneliest chapters. Women from the journaling group. Walter from the senior center, who brought his harmonica and wore a red sweater so bright it almost hurt to look at. Joy the librarian arrived with her famous apple pie. Even Dee, in her late 80s, came bundled in 3 scarves and a snowflake pin, declaring with pride, "I haven't missed a holiday dinner since 1973. The apartment hadn't changed much. The windows still fogged up when I cooked. The light above the stove still buzzed when it warmed. But the feeling inside these 4 walls that had transformed completely. We decorated together in early December. String lights, paper snowflakes cut by hand, a borrowed tree that leaned slightly to one side, adorned with ornaments we made out of old sheet music and scraps of felt. It was imperfect. It was beautiful. And it was mine. I baked all the old recipes I used to make for Angela, the ones she always loved. But this time, I didn't make them with fingers crossed behind my back, hoping someone would notice me. I made them because I wanted to, because sharing good food still brings me joy. We played music. We laughed over burnt cookies. We told stories, real ones. Not the polished kind meant for public display, but the cracked, messy, honest kind that bind people together. I looked around the table that night and realized something so quietly powerful. It nearly brought me to tears. I wasn't lonely anymore. I had feared that by letting go of Angela, I would be left with nothing. But what I had found was everything I'd longed for. Peace, warmth, dignity, presence. There was a softness to this new life. No big declarations, no dramatic scenes. Just 100 small moments strung together, kindnesses given and received, smiles, shared names remembered. The kids from the senior center even made me a card. Inside, it said, "Thank you for showing us what starting over looks like." That night, after everyone had gone, I stood by the window with a mug of cider. I could see lights in the distance. Other apartments lit up. Other trees blinking in living rooms. I imagined all the lives inside those squares of golden glow. I thought of Angela, too. I didn't hate her. I didn't resent her. I simply didn't wait for her anymore. I hoped she was well. I hoped she had everything she thought she wanted. And I hoped truly that someday she'd understand the weight of what she had lost. Not in money, not in inheritance, but in me. I whispered a quiet blessing for her under my breath. Then I turned from the window. I placed the last dish in the sink. I dimmed the lights. And I sat with myself, not as someone missing something, but as someone whole. If you were me, would you have kept the door open? The apartment is quiet again. but it no longer feels empty. The silence now is soft, not sharp. It wraps around me gently, like the last notes of a lullaby. I sit by the window with a blanket over my legs. The daffodils, long since faded and returned to the earth, waiting for another spring. I look out over the parking lot, the pale sky stretching endlessly above the roofs of cars and chimneys. The world carries on, and so do I. I think often of how easy it would have been to disappear inside the pain, to let it swallow me whole, but instead, I chose something else. I chose to breathe, to plant, to rise. Not with vengeance, not with bitterness, but with grace. They say family is everything. And maybe once I believed that too. But I've learned something else since then. Something quieter, something truer. Family is not just blood. It is who shows up. It is who stays. It is who listens when your voice is small and your heart is tired. If you're reading this, maybe you know what it's like. Maybe you've been the one left out, looked past, taken for granted. And if so, please know this. You are not alone. You are worthy of love that does not ask you to shrink. You are worthy of peace that does not rely on permission. You are allowed to say no and still be good and still be kind. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Angela will come back one day. Maybe she won't. But either way, I will not disappear because I have finally remembered who I am. And I will not forget again.